Hi, I'm Brent Oswald. This is my wife, Kirsty Oswald, and together we run Cottonwood Holsteins. A lot of our farm runs around corn. We process feed on the farm for other farms. So we're going to talk about corn today and teach you what we can about how important it is in life and how much fun it is to grow. When we want to plant corn, there's a lot of thought process that goes into it. We'll start picking our seed varieties probably a year in advance because there's so many options. It's like buying a car. You can pick the size of the engine, how many doors it has, what kind of tires, what color. We do the same thing with corn seed because all the corn seeds, as you can see here, are red in color. Well, corn isn't red, but that's because the seed companies can treat the seed for certain bugs and diseases and funguses that we might have in our soil, so that when we seed this into the ground, it has the best chance at being very healthy and a vibrant growing plant and can produce us a lot of corn. We decide when to plant corn very much based on what Mother Nature dictates to us, because that soil does need to have a certain temperature. Also, the equipment we use for planting corn is very large, so we just literally have to be able to drive on the field with the equipment. But because corn is our longest season crop, we need to get it in as soon as possible once the soil is warm enough. That's usually around the first week of May. When we plant corn, germination is very important because we want those seeds to get roots in the ground and get it shoot out of the soil as fast as possible, because every crop is like a big solar panel harvesting the sun's energy. So we need that corn plant out of the ground fast so it can start soaking up the sun. The other thing that's very critical is that we get the spacing between the seeds right, because we plant 40,000 seeds per acre. So there should be about 5.5 inches between each seed. If those seeds are too close together, then they're competing for the nutrients that we put in the soil, and they don't grow right because they can't get enough nutrients for themselves. It'd be like if you sat down at the dinner table and you didn't have enough room to eat comfortably, and everybody at the table was eating off the same plate. You want your own plate, your own food, so that you can comfortably eat and grow. That corn plant wants enough space so it can set its roots and grab all the nutrients it can for growth and do a really good job of producing. The corn that we grow on our farm is primarily used for feeding livestock. Corn is used to feed hogs, chickens, cattle, sheep, goats. Just about every form of livestock consumes corn. It's a very good energy source and very nutritious. Also, lots of corn gets used for ethanol production, which is mixed with gasoline to power cars. Probably the cars that your parents own have ethanol running in them right now. Corn's also used for fiber products. You can find corn in cars, in the insulation in automobiles. It's also used for things like bioplastics and other different fibrous materials in the construction industry, for building homes and buildings. And then of course, you can find corn in food. Things like corn syrup that you'll find in all your pop drinks, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, etc. Probably have corn syrup in them. Corn starch is used in all kinds of baking goods. You'd be surprised where you find corn. We are here in a cornfield. We're just a couple miles from the farm. This cornfield was planted on May 10th. Right here we had some water damage. That's why it's a little sparse and the plants are spaced out. But in the field, it is a very healthy 280-acre field of corn doing very well. And I'm sure if we walked in there, it'd be one heck of a game of hide and seek because those plants are probably about 12 to 14 feet tall. But just for a few facts about corn, when we farmers talk about corn and its life cycles, we always base it on how many leaves it has, and that's very important. So this plant, for instance, we would count the leaves starting at the bottom. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 leaves. But at every life stage of corn, it's different. So all the plants at 6 leaves decided how many kernels it could potentially put on the cob based on how many nutrients there were in the soil, how much moisture there was in the soil. So the cool thing about how it determines its yield is that when that cob is forming in the stem, it actually comes out with the leaf. And each one of these hairs, or we call them silks, that is one potential kernel. Now the only way the kernel can form is if the tassel on top of the corn plant, which is actually the corn plant's flower, it'll give off pollen shed when these seeds fall. So as the plants in the field rustle in the wind and it shakes a bit, these fall down. These might fertilize the plant beside or the one in front. The neat thing with the corn plant is that this ear is actually further down in the leaf, and when this leaf comes out, it'll actually curl around those silks like a funnel. And that way it directs the pollen onto the silks, and hopefully each one of those little hairs gets fertilized by a pollen from the flower so that we get all the kernels on the cob. And that is how the corn plant makes its kernels. Now, if you want to come to my field and pick some corn to eat, it would be very nutritious for you. However, it wouldn't taste so good because the corn that humans usually consume is more sugars than starch. So the flavor is different. That's why they call it sweet corn, because it has more sugar in it naturally. For a feed, we want starch. So here's a nice ear of corn off the plant, just picked. If you look at the silks on top, they're all dried up. That means I bet if we open this up, we'll see all the kernels developed already and filling up with sugar from the plant. The husks are wrapped very tight right now. That way it protects itself from things like birds wanting to eat the corn, little worms getting in, little bugs and larvae, and a whole bunch of stuff that would really damage the corn itself. So we picked this off a random plant. Why don't we open it up to see what it looks like inside? You can see it has lots of layers. We don't want to damage the silk so that you guys can hopefully see how each one of those silks is attached to a kernel. So we'll try to do this somewhat carefully. So here you can actually kind of see how each hair went all the way to the kernels, all the way right to the bottom and all the way right to the top outside of the husks. And if we peel it back, we can actually see how the kernels are forming and developing. And pretty much every kernel made it. You can see the little bump where the silks were attached. Here's one kernel missing. That means that that silk never got pollinated. But all the rest in the row are all there, right to the top. Some more fun facts about corn. If it's planted at the right depth, which is very critical, it'll form these anchor roots or brace roots. They are very important to the corn plant because this becomes a very big plant with a very heavy cob, and on a very windy day or a stormy day, we need that plant to stay standing. The other cool thing about those roots is, once this cob is formed, those are the roots that feed this cob. They take up 80% of the nutrients that this plant is going to suck up all year. So when the seed is first put in the ground, the little roots that it shoots out, they really build the plant. So those roots bring up all the nutrients and the moisture that's needed to put kernels on that cob and give us a nice healthy plant in the end. The other neat thing about corn roots, usually however high the plant is above the ground, is how deep the roots go in the ground. One other neat thing about a corn plant, I know it's hard to believe when it's like 10 and 12 feet tall, it's part of the grass family. So when we need to decide what kind of chemicals maybe we would like to use or how we need to prepare the soil for that plant, it is part of the grass family. It is the same family as your lawn in front of your house. So you might want to know how a farmer knows when he can harvest his corn. So for grain, we're looking for some very obvious visual signs. First of all, the plant's going to go from its nice dark green color, it's going to start browning off because it's fully ripe. No different than wheat turns to a nice golden yellow and sunflowers lose all their petals, so does corn. The tassels will start breaking down, the whole plant will start turning brown, it'll dry off, and the last thing to dry down is the cob. The plant will actually start sucking the moisture out of the cob, then it'll start drying down naturally. Then you'll start seeing things like the husks will open up naturally, you'll get to see the grain exposed on the end of the ear, the silks will fall off totally, and lastly, the cobs will start hanging down to the ground, which is a real indication of you better put some gas in the combine. So we want that corn kernel as dry as possible when we start combining. We want a nice sunny day. The bit of a wind is nice, so everything is dry, so we can do a really nice job of getting those corn kernels off the ear. Because if you think of how many cobs are going through, when we plant corn, we're planting almost 40,000 plants per acre. When we're combining, we're covering just over 12 acres an hour. So that's 480,000 cobs an hour that we're getting all the kernels peeled off with the combine. So we really need the right conditions. So when the combine's driving in the corn, we want that combine to pick up just the cobs. So the header pulls the plants through the header, and the header picks the cobs off, they go into the combine. Once they're in the combine, those cobs are getting bounced and bumped and rubbed, and they rub against a set of fingers with a pair of rotors, and they rub just the kernels off the cobs. It's actually a very amazing technology. So the cobs go out the back, the grain falls onto a grain pan, and then the grain pan separates the kernels from everything else. It's kind of like a flour sieve. The grain pan shakes, the kernels can fall through, and anything that isn't grain blows out the back and gets blown out with the fans. So we just get the grain because I want all the plant material to stay on this field because I want that organic matter to go back in my soil. The combine motors along, it'll dump into a grain cart. The grain cart's driving on the field because it's got bigger tires and it floats better, and we don't want our trucks driving on the field with highway tires compacting the soil. So we got the grain cart keeping the combine going, and then the grain cart loads the semis. The semis will take it back home to start the drying process. So once we have the grain back here on the farm, we have to dry it. Corn never gets dry enough in the field naturally for us to put it in grain bins to store it. So corn safely stores in a grain bin at 15% moisture. So we normally harvest it around 30 or as low as 20% moisture, but somewhere in that 20 to 30%, so we gotta dry it down to 15. Once we've dried the corn and it's in storage, and we can start deciding what we're gonna do with it, whether it's for feed or fuel or fiber or food, then we'll pull it out of the bins. It can be processed into feed. For livestock feed, livestock can't digest a whole kernel of corn. It's kind of like your tooth. It has a very hard enamel around the kernel. So what we need to do is further process that corn, smash it up into small pieces. Now every animal that eats corn digests the corn differently, so we got to process it differently. So if we were selling the corn processed to pigs, for instance, we want it ground up almost to flour. It's measured in microns, that's how small it is. We want no large particles left whatsoever. That way, because a pig digests it so fast, it doesn't have time to break down big pieces, so we need it very small. That way, they can get all the good nutrients out of the kernel to grow better. Chickens and poultry, they have a gizzard, and that gizzard needs to actually work. So we need a little bit bigger pieces so that we keep that chicken's gizzard healthy. So this is a little bit coarser. The pieces are just a little bit bigger. If we go to a mature cow and she's got a big stomach and it's in there for a couple of days, we want even bigger pieces. So we want those corn kernels literally just broken up so that we are about 4 pieces per kernel. And then once we have the corn processed, we can take other ingredients, like this is a piece of soybean meal, and in here there's little pieces of barley, and we can mix other ingredients like sugar to make it sweeter and make the animals want to eat it more, and canola meal to add things like protein, and then we end up with a very nice finished feed that meets all the nutrient requirements for that animal. But the majority of this pile is still corn. Well, thank you very much for joining us here at Cottonwood. I hope you learned a little about corn. Very few people know that we can use corn for livestock feed, we can use it for fuel, we can use it for fiber, and we can use it for nutrition in people. It's amazing. You should start looking on labels to see how many things that you eat that have corn in them. But in the meantime, I hope you learned a lot. We had a great time doing this. Thanks for joining us. We're going to take off into our field of dreams.